On this channel, I regularly inform people about mechanics in Warzone and talk about things that fundamentally change the way Warzone works and things that you need to account for so that you don't end up scrolling through TikTok for the 600th meta that this game has, and rather understand how the basics work yourself. Now, what if I told you that there is a new mechanic that has been found within Warzone that actually is kind of a fundamental design of most first person shooters that people are starting to clock onto? And it's something that not only is something you're going to have to bear in mind for all of your future loadouts, but something that's going to explain a lot of the inconsistent experiences you find in Call of Duty Warzone. And in the background, I've got some gameplay that we ended up playing some rounds with Steve Aoki, which was a bit of a random side quest, but pretty cool. So feel free to enjoy that too. And drop a like and subscribe if this video helps you. Now, before I get this video underway, I want to give a huge shout out to both True Game Data and the exclusive Ace. They both have put out content based on what they're seeing in game here and done some testing in their own instances to explain this mechanic. And I'm hopefully going to try and take it a step further today to explain not only why this mechanic is really important for your loadouts, but why this mechanic is also causing a large number of inconsistencies in Warzone's gameplay. Now, for those of you who are less aware, Call of Duty in the past used something called hit scan, which meant that when you fired a bullet facing at an opponent or aiming at an opponent, the bullet would instantaneously register, creating damage, thus allowing you to win a fight, lose a fight, so on and so forth. And this is the equivalent of playing laser tag. There is no projectile, there's no physical bullet, there's no bullet drop, there's no deviation. It just hits the opponent as you aim at them. But Call of Duties for a large number of years now have been using a projectile based system, so you actually have a physical bullet. And that physical bullet can be affected by bullet drop, it can be affected by wind resistance, it can be affected by things like your initial bullet velocity. And it means that it's a physical projectile that has to physically hit another target. So you would have to lead if an opponent is moving left to right, or you'd have to aim upwards if an opponent is far away in order to get the bullet to dip and hit its target. And it's been universally assumed up until this point, and in hindsight, I'm not entirely sure why, that the entire game was just projectile based. But that isn't how it works. And in fact, in most traditional game development, if you're using a projectile based system, there is always going to be an element of hit scan within your game. Either the bullet velocity of the weapon firing is so fast that within certain ranges it's going to be hit scan anyway, or you've added an artificial element to your game engine in order to make close range gunfights feel snappy and cohesive and feel punchy, and make long range gunfights make a little bit more sense in terms of traditional physics. Now, in Insurgency Sandstorm, another first person shooter, weapons work in a hybrid system. When you fire your bullet, the first 100 milliseconds of time end up being hit scan for that bullet. Anything after 100 milliseconds ends up being physically simulated and ends up having a projectile based system. And the reason the Insurgency Sandstorm devs have this system is to make close range gunfights feel like they make sense. They feel cohesive, they feel fast, and it feels like people are being rewarded for accuracy and have a satisfying gameplay loop within those closer ranges. Because if you're standing 5 to 10 meters in front of somebody, 100 milliseconds of travel time is absolutely nothing. So hit scan will always be applied. It's now been found that the same is the case for Call of Duty, and this includes Warzone and in fact includes pretty much the entire game. And in Call of Duty's case, this means that every single gun in the game has a hit scan range. The first 50 milliseconds in Call of Duty Warzone are always hit scan. So from the instant that you fire your gun, those first 50 milliseconds will always have a hit scan to it. And when you factor in whatever weapon happens to be firing that bullet and its bullet velocity, that is how you calculate the hit scan range. You take the 50 milliseconds, which is universal for every single gun in the game, and you combine it with the initial velocity that the weapon produces to achieve a hit scan range. And what this fundamentally means is that weapons with higher bullet velocity, either through loadouts or just by default, will always have a longer hit scan range than their counterparts. To give you an example of this, True Game Data now has this on his website for the majority, if not all of the weapons, has a hit scan range of 35.5 meters when you factor in its default velocity of, I believe, 770 meters a second with the 50 milliseconds of hit scan range. In contrast, the Ram 9 only has a 500 meters per second bullet velocity, meaning that it only travels 25 meters in 50 milliseconds, meaning that it has a substantially lower hit scan range. So you might be wondering, why is this a problem? And why is hit scan range something that I should be paying attention to in terms of long range weapons and also the inconsistency that it can cause? So it's worth understanding the inconsistencies in the Warzone system to understand why it's something you should think about when building your loadouts, especially if you're building something like long range ARs, long range LMGs, or anything that is supposed to be used in a medium to long range format that isn't something like a sniper rifle. Because this is just a generic assault rifle that people use in both multiplayer and in Warzone. And we know that without attachments and on its base velocity, the MCW has a hit scan range of 35.5 meters. So that means at 35 meters and a half and under, if you fire at a target and you're aiming directly at them, you will get instantaneous feedback of that damage. It is hit scan, it will register on the server instantly, and it may feel more punchier and more snappier when that target dies. But where the inconsistency lies and where it exists is if that target happens to go over 35.5 meters, then all of a sudden you find yourself in a scenario where your bullets actually have to lead the target. So, in an example where somebody is running left or right, or tack sprinting left or right, you go from getting instantaneous hit scan damage at 35 meters and a half and under, or they end up outside 35.5 meters and you have to lead your bullets to hit that opponent. So, in the space of half a meter or a meter, you suddenly go from getting instantaneous damage feedback that feels responsive and snappy to missing bullets on a target because they're actually shots that you should have led because suddenly that bullet is now being physically simulated. And you might be thinking, well, if I'm not getting the hit markers, I'll start leading my target, or maybe I can look at something like the tracers. And whilst the hit markers are a valid way of seeing the damage feedback if you're hitting a leading target or not, the tracers in Call of Duty Warzone are not accurate representations of where your bullets are going at all. And that's been proven a number of times before, so you can't even use your tracers as references in order to see if a target is supposed to be hitting or not. Everything I've just spoken about is assuming a perfect network environment, meaning that there's no lag, no ping latency, no tick rate issues, the server's functioning fine, and everything is going happy and dandy. And the reason that this issue can become very problematic is because the hit scan range of weapons, when combined with Call of Duty's low tick rates and generally slow hit registration for weapons, can create examples where high rate of fire weapons in particular end up feeling utterly ridiculously overpowered in some scenarios and sometimes even broken, and then other scenarios where they feel entirely useless in the space of just a few short meters. Let's take any high rate of fire weapon off the top of my head. We'll go for something like the FR Advancer. This weapon has a hit scan range of 35 meters and a fire rate of 923, meaning that up until 35 meters with this super high rate of fire, the actual rate of fire of the weapon is delivering damage to an opponent faster than the server information can keep up with it. So, as a combination of both having weapons that have a fire rate that exceeds what the servers can even catch up with, and then factoring in that they have their own hit scan ranges where that hit detection is borderline instantaneous, you're going to end up in examples where certain SMGs and certain high rate of fire assault rifles feel like they're killing people instantaneously. So, if it's ever felt like you've died almost instantly, you've gone from full plates to zero plates, it's because you probably have. Because as far as the server's concerned, those shots registered instantly in one information packet and completely blitzed you. So, what does this mean for you? Now, in practical terms, there are going to be tons of inconsistencies and other variables that will come into play as to how Warzone's gunplay goes for you or goes against you. And hit scan range is now just another one of those variables that you're going to have to think about. Because a gun that has a higher hit scan range than other weapons is going to feel more impactful, especially if it has a high rate of fire. So, if you're crafting something that's supposed to be a longer range weapon, something like an LMG or a long range assault rifle, it's worth having the highest possible velocity to extend the hit scan range of that weapon as far out as humanly possible. because it means that this weapon is going to feel like it's doing more damage and likely will register more damage on the servers than some of the other counterparts in the same space. And for those of you who use tools like True Game Data or other platforms and other websites to determine what weapons you should be using, it does mean that the hypothetical TTK of your weapon is affected by the hit scan range on a moving target. Inside the hit scan range and inside the hypothetical TTK window, there is a good chance that you might actually get that hypothetical TTK to be the actual TTK. But outside of hit scan range, where bullet velocity is starting to be factored in and you actually have to lead your opponent, then that hypothetical TTK and actual TTK could shift very rapidly. Now, for the most part here, most of you aren't going to notice a difference. But in terms of the giga sweats and the top 1% of lobbies and the people who want to min-max everything, the reality is that hit scan range is now a viably important statistic when making your loadouts. Hopefully this video explained everything, and if it does, please leave a like, please leave a subscribe, both explaining this in terms that make sense to people and also providing graphics both from myself and from the lovely folks like True Game Data, Exclusive Ace, and also we've used some from Battle Nonsense here as well, is challenging. And I don't envy either of the guys and that I've mentioned so far because I understand that they also probably end up with this issue. But it is hard to make and it is hard to do and explain these in layman's terms that make sense to the vast majority of you viewers, and it does come with a fair amount of effort. So if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, please subscribe, and I'll see you again in the next one, and make sure to check out the other guys below too.